The case of Laura. The purpose of this video feedback, students, is to provide you with some basic background on the processes that we followed in discussing the case of Laura this week. The first thing that I want to share with everybody is that it isn't expected for everybody to master all diagnostic processes this week. It truly isn't. And in some ways, I feel a little bad that a case study of this magnitude kind of hits you right out of the box in this class. But if you really concentrate on understanding the diagnostic criteria, particularly for substance abuse, there's a couple things that stood out as we worked through posts. Probably the most key area that most people need to understand is that when we make the diagnosis of substance abuse or dependence, that it's important that we diagnose which classification or family of substances is being abused or the client is dependent on. Many people say substance abuse with physiological dependence and then go on to describe all these different criteria that Laura may or may not have met in that regard. The truth of the matter is that we need to put alcohol, it might be sedatives, cocaine, amphetamines. Each one has to be examined, and when given that diagnosis, we have to put, say, alcohol dependence, alcohol abuse, sedative abuse, sedative dependence. So we have to really specify in diagnostic criteria what substance or family of substances we're dealing with. This can be a little tricky. In the case of Laura, we dealt with Xanax, which fits into the sedative, hypnotic, and let me see if I can say it right, anxiolytic or anxiolytic classification. It's anti-anxiety meds for those of us who are speech impaired when it comes to that particular word. So that's the first thing, is when diagnosing, we want to make sure we apply that criteria first. The second thing I wanted to share with you is something I had written in many posts, and basically what it came down to is that we have to apply withdrawal and dependence criteria to each substance being used. This becomes very tricky because there's some overlap in how she's being impacted in her day-to-day functioning. And is it due to alcohol? Is it due to the Xanax? Is it due to the diet pills? Excuse me. But this becomes one of those challenges that you face in almost any case. It's never clean and clear. If it is, you've gotten pretty lucky, in my opinion. The other thing that we need to pay attention to as well is that not only applying these criteria to each substance in use, we must realize that withdrawal criteria may differ by classification or type of substance. So alcohol withdrawal may not look the same as sedative withdrawal, which may not look the same as meth withdrawal. So when you're going through your DSM, you really have to go to that particular substance to make sure you're looking at the right withdrawal criteria. All right, as we come around now to all these other pieces, one of the most common things that we find with students, especially if you've entered the helping profession, is our tendency to want to look at all the other things that are diagnosing Laura. Yes, there's grief and loss issues, there are anxiety issues, there are depression issues, there are all sorts of things that are pretty unclear at this point. One of the things that will really help us understand Laura's problems is to get her clean. Once we're clean, we can actually see what came first. Was she functioning fairly normally, and then the substance were introduced? Was it the trauma of her father's death that led her to begin to increase and depend on substances that set off the addiction cycles into motion? By trying to figure this out right at this point at assessment, it's going to be very difficult to do. We also have a tendency to want to look at those criteria rather than the substance abuse criteria. And I will say this in all honesty. The nice part about substance abuse criteria is they're very behaviorally based. They're there, man. Count them, look at them, examine them. They're easy to question. They're time dependent. They're amount dependent. They're very almost measurable. So instead of probing and looking for more information, which a lot of people wanted to make us all feel comfortable, what's there and let's deal with it. Does it fit? Does it not? Now, most diagnoses are really not that clean and clear, but that's okay. For this, you really want to look at those criteria and really depend on those criteria. The problem is when we get to know a client, we tend to start having feelings and reactions that could make us start to kind of waver and interpret those behavioral criteria. The last thing I want to review with you is it came up with a number of posts, and if you haven't gone through and looked, I think it's really worth your while to examine a few of the other posts. Some people were working on the concept of polysubstance abuse or dependence. Polysubstance dependence is one of those tricky kind of in-between diagnoses. It's really when somebody's using a whole host of substances, usually 3 or more, and you can't determine which one's the primary drug of choice, the one that maybe is having the greatest impact. Lots of people look at those criteria and they go, oh, they're using all these substances, it's that. Now you'll find that not everybody in the field completely agrees with how to interpret polysubstance dependence. The truth of the matter is if you can identify a particular drug of choice that's kind of dominating the client's focus, in this case I really believe Laura's main focus and struggles with alcohol. I think that they're being exacerbated by the Xanax and the diet pills and all those other things. I think a lot of those are being used to control symptoms, withdrawal effects, all these different things. Now it's going to be very hard to tell in any kind of concrete fashion. And whenever using sedatives along with alcohol, they tend to have sort of a synergistic effect. They can magnify the effect of one another. So I really think Laura's key issues are both around sedatives and alcohol, and I believe there's dependence on both at this point. Now, you don't have to agree with me, and I don't grade you on agreement. I'm really looking at your process. Did you apply process? Were you thorough? It's really hard because when it comes down to diagnostics, you can't be lazy and you can't be superficial. You have to look at those criteria, apply them, label it, and justify that label. Sometimes by those telling us what it is that they meet as well as why they don't meet others. I know some of them you're probably going to go, well, I need a little more information. But you can't go, okay, alcohol's the problem and we'll keep an eye on the rest. You really have to look at those criteria and do your best to apply them. I'll post a link to a really good article that I shared in other posts. It's a simple 3-paragraph description of polysubstance dependence. Again, I would truly believe that Laura doesn't fit polysubstance dependence because she's got a predominant need for alcohol, at least in my reading of Laura. I'm always open to your feedback, and I hope that you find this video explanation of the case of Laura helpful in your process. Please email me or feel free to contact me through my Skype contact numbers if you have any questions about the case of Laura or this process. Thank you.